Wow. Well, I am very privileged today to be joined again by Lisa Ventura, who is co-founder of Imposter Syndrome Awareness Day, as I am, and we are very privileged to be joined by Dr. Juliet Lyndle. And yeah, I know you've got a lot of experience in this area, Juliet. Would you like to just explain a little bit about that, please?
My main experience started as a child when I grew up with a very narcissistic mother. So I kind of learned by life experience. Previously, I was a scientific researcher, but then moved into the field of mental health and working in various charities because I had the life experience for that. And I was looking after somebody who had a brain injury, which also manifested as various mental health issues. So I kind of life brought things to me. And then I began to work with other people that had experienced similar situations and found that I could help people in the journey. So it's really personal interest that it first began.
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And Lisa, I know you work in the cybersecurity industry as well. So yeah, I think it's a great industry to be in. I know, but I think there's a lot of this sort of thing going on everywhere, really, not just in cybersecurity.
Absolutely. So I see a lot of it within the cybersecurity industry, and I had it for years, and I didn't even know that it had a name until a few years ago. And that's what led me to being one of the co-founders of the day with yourself and Kim Adele. And I think there needs to be a lot more conversation about it, because you think that you're the only one that's got these feelings or that's feeling this. And I think until you start, talking about it a bit more and being more open about it, and getting that conversation going, and that's what this day is all about. But back to the theme of this day, which is the link of this event, which is the link between those with narcissistic traits and narcissistic personality disorder and imposter syndrome. Like Dr. Lyndle, my experience comes from a lifetime of experiencing those types of personalities within my life, both in my personal life and within a work environment as well. And that's what's led me to undertake a lot of research into this area.
Right. It's very interesting. I mean, we hear a lot about narcissism. I get paranoid. I'm a narcissist, like I think a lot of people do. But Dr. Lyndle, would you mind explaining what is narcissism, and what's the difference between those with narcissistic traits and full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, please? Because I think that would be really helpful.
I mean, at the basic level, a narcissist has a very much exaggerated sense of self-importance. Everything's about them. The whole world centers around them. And actually, all of their interactions are usually to feed that exaggerated sense of self. They'll want a lot of people to tell them how wonderful they are, for example, and they'll want a lot of praise. And basically, it can be a degree from a very mild form of that right up to very serious narcissistic personality disorder that usually has been a lifelong trait, a lifelong habit, a lifelong pattern, and it can even reach the point where they're actually harming others physically, mentally, abusing them, right to that extreme. So,
right. So, do you think that it can first present itself in childhood, and if so, why?
It definitely can present in childhood, although very often it depends on the parenting. If the parents are very boundaried with the child may not be expressing it to such a high degree. Children are naturally quite self-oriented in any case as they grow and develop. But brain scans of people with narcissistic personality disorder and different degrees of narcissism has found that there's actually an area of the brain which is to do with empathy that's actually very thin in people who have narcissism. And the worse the narcissism is, the thinner it is. So this suggests actually that it does start in very early stages of life and, will continue through life to that degree.
Right. What do you think, Lisa? Have you sort of spent a bit of time thinking about this yourself? It sounds like, from what I gather, you've been digging into it.
I have, and as Dr. Lyndle said, a lot of the studies do suggest that narcissism can present firstly in childhood, but it does depend very much on the upbringing. Studies have also shown that if you're brought up by narcissistic parents or have that kind of narcissistic parenting background, two things will usually happen. You either become extremely empathetic and have a really high degree of empathy, or you take on those traits and you become narcissists yourself, or you develop those traits because you've learned them from having been exposed to those personality types from childhood. So it really is a case of almost sort of two paths that you can go. I know myself that I have almost sort of extremely, I feel things really, really intensely, probably a lot more intensely than the people. I mean, if, for example, if I see someone that's, that falls over or hurts themselves, it's like, I feel that whole thing that's happened as if I'd done that myself. It's that kind of acute. So I'm really tuned in to a lot of that, and I think that that's something that does present in childhood that you can and take moving forward. I don't want to steal Dr. Lyndle's thunder on this, because it is something that she has said, but not ironically, those with narcissistic personality disorder or narcissistic traits are actually the biggest imposters. And that is the irony with this. And Dr. Lyndle, as I said, I don't want to steal your thunder, so I don't know if you want to come in on that, because I just think that is so true. And that's something that you've said.
Well, narcissists actually, they might present with this very confident, well, there's different types of narcissism, so it's not necessarily so. But they do actually have this kind of false self. It's not authentic. And it often covers up a deep emptiness inside. So they are actually not being a true, real person in a way. They're presenting themselves in a way that achieves what they want to obtain from the world and from others and from their interactions. Whereas people who perhaps are, for example, empaths or have got imposter syndrome, then it's often from a very different core. So, for example, if you've grown up with a very narcissistic parent, you learn not to focus on your own needs at all. You kind of cut off from your own needs and your own self and your own identity, and you become the person that the narcissist wants you to be in order to please them or to be safe. So it's kind of the same external imposterness, but from a completely different center.
Wow. So can imposter syndrome and narcissism be present in the same individual? And if so, how does this affect their perception of themselves and their interactions with others?
And that really relates to what we just said, in that in themselves, I would say they can't exist in the same person. It's actually a different thing. Narcissism is actually quite different from imposter syndrome, but yet at the same time, narcissists, they are huge imposters. They're often, they'll be different with different people. They're very good at learning how to present themselves in order to get what they need, which is known as narcissistic feed, or very simply put, attention from others. They'll often try to get people to react, to get attention, whether it's good or bad, it almost doesn't matter. But they're doing it for a very different reason than somebody with imposter syndrome actually feels that usually that they're not good enough. So it's almost the opposite in a way at the core, that the narcissist will feel this exaggerated self-importance, whereas the person with imposter syndrome will feel less, that their abilities are less than others would perceive them to be.
Can I come in? Sorry, Nat,
please.
Can I come in a little bit on that as well? Because I think that, and certainly from my experience, anybody with these kind of narcissistic personality traits or full-blown disorder are very good at gaslighting others and making you question your perception of reality. And I've been like that, forever. And I would always think, did I really hear that? Did they say that? And when you try and question them about it, it's just, oh, I never said that, oh, I didn't do that, or I didn't. And you really question yourself about it all the time. And I think that's what leads to a greater level of imposter syndrome and those sort of thoughts or feelings of feeling, for myself, I've felt all my life that I'm a huge fraud and I shouldn't be here, and what am I doing, and so on. And I think that because I've lived in that environment of being gaslit to what my perception of reality actually is, that's what's lent itself to those feelings of imposter syndrome being much stronger.
Right. So do you think, Juliet, that people with narcissism cause others to have imposter syndrome by their behavior?
My experience would be that if you've been brought up with narcissistic parent or parents, then almost certainly you'll have imposter syndrome in one way or another. If you've been in a relationship with someone that's a narcissist, then yes, I think you would end up, if you stayed too long, for sure, you'd end up with imposter syndrome, because one of the things that they tend to do, one of their methods of keeping themselves sort of elevated above their the others, to make themselves feel good about themselves, is that they'll actually systematically undermine a person, undermine their confidence. I've watched this in various workplaces. I watched a very talented young woman basically be consistently undermined and sexually harassed by a boss until she actually felt like she was completely useless. And he would do things like, when she left, he took her computer and sent emails to other parts of the company that made her look like she'd done things incorrectly. He basically, they're very happy to lie, but also they've got a very strange sense of reality where, like Lisa said, they'll actually cause those around them to experience cognitive dissonance and a lack of confidence in their own knowing, in their own abilities. So yeah, I definitely think that is the case. I think if you spend long enough with a narcissist, then you'll definitely end up with imposter syndrome. But at the same time, you've got to have that vulnerability to that, because there are plenty of people who would never spend 5 minutes with someone that treated them like that. So there's something in the person that is actually allowing themselves to be treated in that way and isn't removing themselves from that situation for some reason.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand that very much. It's very interesting, the study of psychology and people, and once you sort of start digging it, it just becomes far more complex than you ever imagined. It's like you're opening an onion, right? And you're trying to understand all these different sorts of people and different viewpoints and everything else. It's a real challenge. So do you think that narcissistic behavior is a form of self-protection or self-preservation?
Do you want to speak, Lisa, or shall I?
If you want to go, and I'll come in.
In a way, it is. It's they're protecting this like false persona, because actually that's very brittle. It's got no solidity. It's got no strong foundation. So in a way, they're protecting that, but they're protecting something that's not actually real, but it feels like to them. I've actually spoken to someone who's admitted, the way that they do this sometimes, and they actually do feel incredibly vulnerable, because they often will have to divide and conquer, keep stories separate, keep people separate, not allow others to talk with each other, because there's a great risk of them being found out if actually everybody gets together and talks about actually their perceptions of that person. It's often only by separation that they can maintain this kind of false persona and control of those around them. So yeah, I think in a way it is self-preservation, but it's preservation of a kind of false self.
I've got something that I think I would like to know about. So do you think that narcissists actually might not even know that they're a narcissist because they have no awareness of the situation at all, and it's just sort of how they are, like it's their behavior, like it's just they're used to behaving in that way, And if you called them a narcissist, they would be like deeply offended and think that they were a psychopath or something, and get completely, blown out of all proportion. Lisa, to you first.
Can I come in on that? That
please?
absolutely spot on. I've had firsthand experience of that. They have. You said at the start of this talk that you often question that you might be a narcissist. I can tell you hand on heart that anybody that does that and actually has those thoughts about, am I a narcissist, is not. They will absolutely think that their behavior is perfect in every way, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with them, that it's everybody else around them that's causing problems, and it's not them. They're not capable of any self-reflection, of any anything in terms of that in their behavior. They are the most God-given perfect person on the planet. And in my own experience, the only thing I've found that actually works, because I'll often get asked, well, how do you deal with these type of personalities? And especially in the workplace, I've come up against them time and time and time again in the workplace. And I'm afraid to say that the only bit of advice I can give for dealing with them is you need to move on. You'll need to somehow find a new role and move on and get out of there as soon as you can, because you can't change that person. They won't listen. They won't self-reflect. They won't look at their own performance. And for your own sake and sanity, the only advice I can give is to find a new role and get out of there. Again, if you're coming across them in your personal life, and I appreciate that this is easier said than done, the best bit of advice I can give is to just go absolutely no contact with them. And that's something that I've had to do with various people throughout my life on a personal level as well. Dr. Lyndle, I don't know if you want to come in on that as well, but yeah, that's my take on it.
I think Lisa's covered that quite well there. Yeah. I mean, it's a bit similar to, like, I grew up thinking that everybody else felt like I feel. Like, I'm like Lisa, I have a very deep kind of sense of, I mean, the worst thing for me is actually someone else's pain, not my own almost. It's almost worse. To watch someone suffering is excruciating. So that's really, you don't imagine. I had no idea. It took me a very long time and reading and researching a lot to even begin to accept that there was kind of possibly no hope. For example, for my parent who was a narcissist, I always had this like unwavering belief that somehow it could be healed in this person, or enough love, and actually things would improve for them and they would be better. But it never happened. And also the other thing I discovered is actually that watching my other parent try and bring enough love, enough understanding, enough caring actually made them worse, because they learned that actually their bad behavior resulted in a lot of extra attention and a lot of like, I mean, the motto in the family was, don't upset your mother. Whatever happens, don't upset her, because, the consequences. But actually, it actually made the whole situation much worse. So I think in the way that I had no comprehension that a person could actually not have any idea of what they're doing. To do most awful things and then not apparently be bothered by it in the slightest. It was just unthinkable to me. So I imagine that in the same way, for someone who has, especially the more extreme narcissistic traits, then they probably have no comprehension. I actually do a lot of metaphysics and other kind of healing work like that, and meditation. And I actually did an exercise once where I did my best to stand in the shoes of a partner who was exhibiting a lot of concerning narcissistic traits. And I actually felt, when I tried my best to feel what it was to be him, that he had this kind of hollowness inside, this emptiness that could never be filled, and that he felt that I had this love that I should be giving him, and that I was somehow withholding it from him. And he was very angry and hated me for this. And I actually quite daringly wrote it all down and read it to him and said, is this really how it is for you? Is this? But the first thing I really felt was this complete lack of connections, all the rich connections that I feel to life, to other people. were completely absent. It was just not there. He was very isolated. When I spoke to him, he actually said it was extremely spot on, exactly how he felt and how he perceived it. And another person who was very, very intuitive also said about my parent that she's like an empty shell, like there's this shell, but there's emptiness inside. So I think it does appear that the person who's deeply narcissistic may have absolutely no comprehension of what it is to feel, what it is to be empathetic, what it is like for other people to live life and experience life as we do.
Wow.
Also,
that's really interesting. Really
and also
interesting.
in my experience, Nat, they tend to live their lives through the children, and I've had first-hand experience of this. So they will be overly involved, and they'll want to come to everything that the child is doing or be involved in it, but it's not because it's because they want to have this thing of, look at me, aren't I an amazing parent, aren't I wonderful, I'm there all the time, but it's suffocating, and it's stifling for that child and the child's development.
Wow. This is really interesting, because I've been thinking a lot recently about, putting yourself in other people's shoes and being more compassionate. And I was reflecting upon something that happened to me while I was traveling. Long story. I went to Belize to pick up a wedding certificate and had something awful happen to me. And it really made me think about what it was like to be in the other person's shoes. I'm writing a chapter in a book about this at the moment. But when it comes to narcissism, right? And is it something that you can get rid of? And if so, are there sort of solutions that are available for that?
Looking at, I've watched and researched a lot of experts in the field who basically said that in thousands and thousands and thousands of cases, I think one of them said they've never seen a narcissist heal from being narcissistic. Another one said they'd seen it once or twice. I think once. I think two different people have said they've seen it once. And in both cases, it was when there was a partnership, so a husband and wife, and one was narcissistic. And the other one, who wasn't narcissistic, finally reached the stage where after many years, they just actually got to the stage where they just didn't care. They realized that there's no possible way to improve the relationship. They actually didn't care one way or another whether the person changed, whether the person stayed or left. They actually sort of reached that stage of they just had enough completely. And in those cases, the narcissist apparently improved, sought help, and got better. But I have to question this, because I have seen how a narcissist will just learn, okay, so this doesn't, I mean, my mother would go through like tears 1 second, anger another, she'd just like run through various whatever works until she finds something that works to get what they want. So I do feel that perhaps, yes, a narcissist can change behavior, but whether they change deep inside, I don't know. But then it's also a matter of degree. If a person's just got a few narcissistic traits, then perhaps it's not such a problem. And having narcissistic traits doesn't necessarily mean that the person's a bad person. It's just that they're not quite wired up the same. But it comes to whether actually hurting other people or not. But I'd suggest, I think it's highly unlikely a narcissist will become anything other than a narcissist, but they might learn, and they might learn to have a bit of greater awareness about how what they do impacts on others. But it's different from having that knowing inside, this is wrong, what I'm doing, this is hurting someone. But they might have to learn it, like learning another language.
Right. What do you think, Lisa? Did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think it's rare, as Dr. Lyndle said, but there are one or two. There's a particular one on YouTube, and his name escapes me, but he has been diagnosed with full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, and he is working on trying to change and having lots of therapy and so on. and he regularly posts videos about his healing journey, his journey to change in that respect. And he is, you know, fully aware of his behavior. And he's really interesting because he talks, you know, about how he knows what he's doing when he's doing it, but he can't help himself to people. So I think that's quite a rare thing, because 9 times out of 10 they're just not capable of that kind of self-reflection, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah. I think it is possible, but I think it takes a really specific type of person to be able to, you know, face that diagnosis, and then more than that, be able to, you know, look at changing themselves and actually do something, you know, about it. And I think they can also be the biggest mimics. So they will look at other people and other people's behavior, and they will look at what they can take on board and adapt to make themselves fit in and appear more normal than they actually are.
Wow. Yeah, well, it's that's very interesting. So, are there any cultural or societal factors that contribute to the development of either imposter syndrome or narcissism, and how can those be addressed, Juliet, please?
I think, you know, modern times and Western society it's moved away from community, from people working together to help each other, a little bit more to each person for themselves. It has, I mean, there is that kind of slightly more narcissistic tendency generally in the culture. And there's a lot in narcissism about separation and division and better and worse than, and hierarchies. So certain businesses and workplaces, I think, especially with those kind of hierarchies, can lend to narcissism flourishing, because people can get away with that kind of thing in a very different way. And of course, in imposter syndrome as well, if you look at how we value men and women, for example, at the very basic level, women are still paid less generally than men. So that's actually sending the message that as a woman, you're actually worth less than a man. You're somehow not as good as a man in the workplace. So, I mean, and then there's also, you know, various different other cultures. Like a friend of mine worked in the NHS, and she worked with a lot of people of Indian origin, and a lot of women would come to her, and often they weren't allowed to come on their own. They had to be chaperoned by a man. They weren't even sort of allowed out on their own. But they were very often set up. And I also saw this in a relationship that I had with a Mauritian who was originally Indian origin, that this idea of the woman staying at home and taking care of the family and not working or not being allowed to work. In fact, his family, the woman was basically not allowed to work, but she was also not given access to the family finances, for example. The men would spend it on gambling and horses, and the women would be trying to look after the children with very little resources. So, and they were made to feel less again. So, I mean, in different cultures and in the gender bias, I think there is a lot there which will tend to lead to imposter syndrome. And I don't know if Lisa would like to add also to these things.
I mean, from my side, I guess that there would be some sort of stuff around, you know, cultural. So I certainly have seen from my side the big sort of, you know, grandiose sort of head of the house type of personality is very prevalent. So certainly that's something that can come into to effect there.
It's interesting, you know, I'm sitting here with two females. I think that it is certainly a choice, though, that we make in terms of how we live our lives, right? So if there's a female who wants to be in that situation of running the household and everything, it should be, you know, it's perfectly okay, right? In my opinion.
Yes.
But it must be a choice, right? It must be a choice. Like it's not like they don't just wake up one morning and you know they've changed and they're stuck at the kitchen sink. I mean, there's a, you know, there's a practical conscious decision, right, to these sorts of things. But I definitely agree with cultural differences here. Like, there are massive cultural differences, and in the way that what I've understood about narcissism from this conversation is it's certainly probably more prevalent in those sorts of environments that you mentioned, because I know a lot of it, like Indian dentists, for example, I like that. I used to work in dental marketing a few years ago, so I kind of I understand that quite a lot. But societal factors, I think are certainly affected by social media. I mean, social media and the way that they trigger people, they trigger you to either think you're an imposter or to become more narcissistic in the way that you sort of look at things, right? I don't know. What do you think about that, Juliet?
I actually don't really use social media because there's not actually, I mean, I do occasionally use it, but there's a lot of, you're right, it's really a great playing field for people, for example, who are a bit narcissistic and want to undermine or give opinions, or there's also not a lot of authenticity sometimes. I used to look at my friend's post. This one friend I had who I knew was suffering from depression and anxiety and other things, and you read her social media posts and it's all light and life, and I'm doing this, I'm doing, you read her post and you think she's having the most amazing life. Talk to her on the phone and it's a completely different story. So I do feel in a way that social media needs to be more authentic, more real. But at the same time, you see, it needs to be a safe place for people to share. And it's very difficult to make it that way if there are those who actually have a completely different agenda and using social media for their own ends, for their own kind of narcissistic, exploration. So, yeah, I think I'm not the best person to ask about social media in a way, but I think social media could be amazing, challenge. But it's very tricky.
It could be. Yeah. So,
I mean,
about these culture. Pardon? Sorry.
The idea behind it is like connecting people, bringing people together, becoming more as we join. So yeah, it could be amazing.
So in terms of the cultural and societal factors that contribute towards either negatively or positively encouraging these behaviors, how do you think they can be addressed? That's a big question, I know.
I think one of the main things is transparency, actually, and connection. When people are connected, they talk to each other. For example, Lisa and I worked somewhere where we were actively discouraged from sharing information, from sharing things with other members of the team, to the extent where people not only couldn't do their jobs properly, but we started becoming nervous about, am I allowed to do that? We started questioning and becoming far less effective in our jobs, which actually is not great. But the more openness, the more transparency, and the more connection there is, then that's really the kind of the core basic things that I think would really help to change this.
Fantastic. So have you got anything you'd like to add to that, Lisa?
Just going on from what Dr. Lyndle said about the organisation that we were in, it was, I've never known such, it was all sort of divide and conquer and, keep this confidential, and we none of us could speak to the other, or we were worried about, oh God, what if we say this, should we not say this? And it was just all so unnecessary. It really didn't foster transparency or a culture of group and team collaboration at all. So definitely something that we've both had first-hand experience of.
Right. So Dr. Lyndle, would you mind sharing your experience on imposter syndrome from your own perspective, please?
Well, I actually never felt like I was good enough at anything, and I even I got into a private school that was paid for by the government, and I had a scholarship. I kind of got the best results, but I still felt like I wasn't really good enough. And then I used learning and academia as a way to think that I had some value or that I was good at something. And I actually ended up doing a PhD at Imperial College, which for science and technology is actually it was the top place at the time. So even after I did that, I'd look for jobs and I'd think, oh, no, I can't apply for that. That's too much money, or I can't do that. And I always felt like I should apply. In fact, what I basically did was always apply way under my ability or pay grade, just so that I could feel like okay about myself. And there were colleagues who I did a master's as well, and I got a distinction in the master's. And there were colleagues who got kind of much lower grades than me and ended up working for a company and getting paid like basically twice as much as me and having more holidays and things like that. But I never felt like that was even okay for me to do that. And I remember once spending a weekend with some friends, and this man came and joined us, and he'd actually was starting a job the Monday after. And I was talking to him, and he said that it was a job in IT, and that the job required him to do some particular kind of programming, and that he told them that he could do this, and he hadn't actually ever studied it or learned it. But he didn't seem to care about that. He felt that once his foot was in the door, then they'd just let him learn when he was at work. Maybe you couldn't get away with this now. This was like 20 odd years ago, but I thought that's kind of the difference. Like, for example, a narcissist might do that, but I wouldn't, or, I wouldn't dream of it. I'd always feel like, I wouldn't better sleep at night if I behaved like that in life. So yeah, I've never felt like anything that I did was really as good as what other people can do, even when, for example, the qualifications are there kind of that prove otherwise. I still feel like somehow everybody else is better than me. I think it's a very strange, it's quite hard to, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any kind of logical sense. But it's this underlying kind of sense that you kind of go through life with, as Lisa mentioned. And perhaps Lisa would like to
Makes a lot of sense to me. Makes a lot of sense to me, actually. Being at a private school and actually not being the richest person there, and seeing all of these children and their parents have Bentleys and massive houses and pools and stuff. Like it's a real challenge, and I think that is something that it either motivates you to be better and improve yourself, or it doesn't, right? And it could be really bad.
I think
so,
also,
it's
when I was before GCSEs, my father came and sat down next to me and brought out his some exam results for some electronics and other things that he did at one point. And he brought them out and showed them to me, and he said, "Look, here, this is what you should be doing." And it was like he got like 100% in one of the exams, 90 something, like it was like 95% upwards in all of his exams. And I just felt like, what's the point even trying? Because I knew that nobody like today was getting those kind of marks in their exams. Nobody was getting 100% in anything. So I felt like it was actually impossible for me to ever succeed, because I couldn't get 100% all the time, and I felt like I should be able to, and anything less was kind of like somehow unacceptable. So that kind of played in too. Even though he wasn't the narcissistic one, he still had that effect. And later I talked to him about it, and he said he was trying to encourage me to say, you could do as well as this. But actually I took it as like this impossible, like suddenly, like, the hoops I had to jump through were like 5,000 miles up in the air and completely unreachable. So yeah, it was very, very challenging. So
yeah, it is a challenge. It's amazing how a message can be misconstrued. So Lisa, if you've got anything you'd like to sort of add on there on your imposter syndrome journey.
Yeah, I think in terms of the whole, it's come out more in terms of the whole sort of career piece, but I think sort of more ironically, it was more prevalent with me of that environment of growing up and not feeling good enough and having to people please all the time, and making sure that everybody else around me was happy before I would even consider looking at myself. And I think I've lived my entire life in fight or flight mode, where I've just been like, oh God, are they happy? Have I done enough? Is this okay? Have I taken them there? Have I done this? Is their shopping done? Have they got absolutely everything that they need? And not for once stopping to consider my sort of thoughts or feelings or what I might have wanted. So for me, it's kind of manifested itself in that way, but it then kind of transpired onto my career. And a lot of what Dr. Lyndle was saying is so true. I would always be thinking about, oh, I can't apply for that, I don't have the right skills, or I'm not the right person, or I won't fit in, or I can't ask for this amount of money for what I'm doing, and so on. And that's something I know you and I that have had these conversations, and I'm starting to try and get a lot better with that now, and really sort of focusing on my time is valuable. And I do bring a lot to the table. So I am trying to get better in terms of, making sure that I get adequately compensated for, the work and the things that I do.
Yeah, I think also, sorry to quickly jump in. I think also there is a male-female thing here. I think most certainly there's a male-female thing from what I've been reading about, females not asking for the raise, whereas guys go and ask for the raise or a higher wage. And I think that it is just inherent in the differences, because we've got more testosterone than women, and that's just it's a fact, right? Like, it's a scientific fact, yeah. And so that obviously affects your behavior in the way that perhaps you might say, oh well, I'll just learn on the job. If I get the job, then I'll just do it there and then. And I think whereas certainly being male, I'm a bit less prone to imposter syndrome. However, I think looking at self-beliefs, and I was talking about this earlier, looking at self-beliefs and how we talk to ourselves, I'm a lot more brutal than a lot of people. Like, I'm like, well, you've just got to fail yourself forward. Like, you've just got to just do it, and eventually you will get better and better. But in fact, talking to Kim and you this morning, Lisa, I kind of realized that we're very different in the way that we look at things, like and do things, right? And I just think that life it's interesting, and it's a journey. It really is a massive journey that we're going on here, and hopefully a lot of people will take away some great things from what we've talked about today so far. And Dr. Juliet Lyndle, is there anything else that you'd like to sort of add? If everybody forgets everything that you've just said, how can they kind of move forwards with their lives in this context?
And I found for me it's been quite a journey, but each person, if you've got imposter syndrome, actually deep inside of you, you've got something really, really special and really unique that you can bring to the world. And if you were really able to connect with that, you realize that not only are you valuable, but that what you have to offer is actually priceless. It's beyond price. And for example, the narcissistic upbringing or experience that can completely disconnect you from that will lead to an imposter syndrome, because you're not being your true self. But if you can take that journey, and it's rather a longer conversation than we can have here today, but to reconnect to your true authentic self and your true beauteous nature, then really I think that imposter syndrome begins to fall away naturally as you kind of begin to shine your own light, that light that was never allowed to shine or was actively discouraged. So yeah, I think it's about focusing more on self-care and looking after yourself and making a safe space for that kind of beautiful part of yourself to come forward and start leading you through life.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. It's been really interesting. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody, and thanks Lisa as well. Really appreciate everyone. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.